The email arrives on a Tuesday afternoon with the subject line, Your Annual Account Summary, 2014. You almost delete it. Your email provider sends these automatically, archival records you never asked for and never open, but something makes you pause. Maybe it's the year, 2014. 12 years ago. A different apartment, a different job, a version of yourself you haven't thought about in a long time. You open it, and for the next 40 minutes, you don't move. The first thing you notice is how familiar it feels. Not the specific amounts, those are different, smaller, the salary of someone earlier in their career, but the shape of it, the rhythm, the way the money moves. Income arrives on the same days of the month, rent leaves first, then groceries, then a series of smaller amounts that individually seem reasonable and collectively eat everything that's left. You scroll through the 2014 transactions slowly. Coffee, a clothing purchase, a dinner out, another dinner out, something from an online retailer you can't identify anymore because the store no longer exists. A recurring subscription, you have no memory of what it was for. Another clothing purchase, a transfer to savings that happened once, in March, and then didn't happen again until September. You look at the savings number for 2014, the total amount you put away in 12 months. Then you open your 2026 statements on a second tab. You make significantly more money now. You have a better job, more experience, a salary that would have seemed like a fantasy to the 2014 version of you. And yet the shape is the same. Income arrives, rent leaves first, groceries, smaller amounts that seem reasonable individually, a recurring subscription. You're not entirely sure what it's for, you should check. A transfer to savings that happened reliably for the first 6 months and then got skipped twice in the second half of the year. The savings percentage, the fraction of your income you actually kept, is within 2 percentage points of what it was in 2014. You sit with that for a long time. You start going back further. Not just 2014. You find statements from 2016, 2018, 2020. Your email provider has kept everything. Years of financial records sitting in a folder you never looked at. A complete and utterly honest archive of every decision you made with money over the last decade. What you find is not what you expected to find. You expected to see growth. You expected to see the evidence of becoming more intentional, more sophisticated, more financially aware. All the things you've told yourself you've been becoming for 12 years. You've read the books. You've listened to the podcasts. You know the difference between assets and liabilities. You can explain compound interest to someone who's never heard of it. And yet, the 2016 statements look almost identical in shape to the 2014 statements, adjusted for a small raise. The 2018 statements show the same patterns at a slightly higher income level. 2020 introduces a disruption, a period of reduced spending during lockdown, that briefly produces a savings rate you've never matched before or since. And then, by late 2020, the pattern reasserts itself. The spending climbs back. The savings rate returns to its familiar range. By 2022, you are earning considerably more than you were in 2014, and saving, in percentage terms, almost exactly the same amount. The money got bigger, the pattern stayed the same. Here is what a financial pattern is. It is a behavior that has survived enough different circumstances to reveal itself as a preference, rather than a situation. You have told yourself, at various points over the last 12 years, that you would save more when you got the raise. And then you got the raise, and you didn't save more, at least not in proportion. You told yourself you would spend less when you moved to the cheaper apartment. And then you moved and the spending found other things to fill the gap. You told yourself that once the student loans were paid off, the breathing room would let you build something. And then the loans ended, and the breathing room became a slightly nicer version of the same life. None of this was dishonest. You believed all of it when you said it. The raise was real. The cheaper apartment was real. The paid-off loans were real. The intention was real. What wasn't real, or wasn't durable, was the assumption that a change in circumstances would automatically produce a change in behavior, because the behavior was never about the circumstances. The behavior was about the pattern, and the pattern, looking back at 12 years of evidence, has been remarkably consistent across remarkably different circumstances. There is a coffee shop that appears in your 2014 statements approximately 3 times a week. The charges are small, $3, $4. This was before the great inflation of the specialty coffee era, and you remember the place vaguely. It was near the apartment you lived in then, a walk-up in a neighborhood that has since become unrecognizable. You went there the way you go somewhere when it becomes part of the texture of your life, automatically, without decision. You don't go to that coffee shop anymore. You moved. The neighborhood changed. The shop might not even exist. But there is a different coffee shop in your 2026 statements. It appears approximately 3 times a week. The charges are higher, $7, $8, but the frequency is almost identical. The function is the same. The role it plays in the week is the same. You go the way you go somewhere, when it becomes part of the texture of your life. You didn't decide to replicate this habit. You didn't sit down in 2026 and think, I will now recreate the coffee pattern of my 2014 self. It just reformed, in a new location, at a new price point, doing the same thing it was always doing, providing a small, regular, reliable comfort that the week seems to require. This is what habits actually are, not choices you make each time, structures that reassert themselves in new environments until something actively dismantles them. In 2014, you were going out to dinner approximately 6 times a month. The amounts were smaller. This was before the restaurant industry's post-pandemic repricing. But the frequency was consistent. 6 dinners, usually the same few places, usually on Fridays and Saturdays, usually alone or with 1 or 2 people. In 2026, you are going out to dinner approximately 6 times a month. This is the one that stays with you most. Not because 6 dinners a month is wrong. It isn't. It might be exactly right for your life. But because you've had roughly 100 conversations over the past 12 years about your relationship with eating out. You've gone through phases of cooking at home more. You've tried meal planning. You've had the "we're spending too much on restaurants" conversation with yourself in January of at least 4 different years. And then, by March or April, you're back to 6 dinners a month. Not because you failed, not because you have no willpower, but because 6 dinners a month is apparently what your life needs. And you've spent 12 years trying to talk yourself out of it, without ever asking whether it was actually a problem or just a preference that never got acknowledged as a preference. The saving story is the one that requires the most honesty. In 2014, you were saving roughly 9% of your take-home income. This felt like not enough. You knew it was not enough. The book said 20%. The podcast said 20%. Some of them said 50% if you were serious about early retirement, and you half-heartedly bookmarked those episodes without listening to them again. Over the course of the next 12 years, your income grew by a significant margin, and your savings rate, the percentage, not the absolute number, moved between 7 and 11%. Never broke 12 for a full year. Never stayed below 7 for more than a few months before some external pressure brought it back. 9%. The baseline always reasserted. Here is the question this raises. Is 9% your baseline because of your expenses, or because of your psychology? Is it the rent and the groceries and the coffee and the 6 dinners a month that make 9% the ceiling? Or is 9% the number that feels, somewhere below conscious decision-making, like the right amount to save, the amount that produces neither anxiety about spending too much nor guilt about not saving enough? Because if it's the second one, then the path forward is not a new budget. The path forward is a new relationship with the number itself. He knew some things you've forgotten. He knew how to cook in a small kitchen with cheap ingredients and produce something he was proud of. He knew which grocery store had the best prices, and he went there instead of the convenient one. He knew how to spend a Saturday without spending money on it. Not because he was disciplined, but because there wasn't money to spend, and so he found other ways to fill the time, and some of them were better than what you do now on Saturdays with a credit card and good intentions. He was anxious about money in a way you aren't anymore, and the anxiety, for all its unpleasantness, kept her attentive. He checked her balance before buying things. Not because he was virtuous, but because the number was small enough to matter at the level of individual transactions. Now the number is larger, and individual transactions feel less consequential, and so you check less and spend more without noticing. He also knew something you've stopped knowing. What it felt like to want something for a long time before getting it. The slow accumulation of wanting, the specific texture of a purchase that has been waited for. He bought a coat in November 2014. You can see it in the statements. Larger than the usual amounts, standing out from the small recurring charges. And you remember that coat. You wore it for 7 years. You knew every stitch of it. You bought a coat last year. You're not sure which one. You'd have to check. You closed the tabs. Both of them. 2014 and 2026, side by side on a screen. More similar than 10 years of living should have made them. You don't feel guilty. That's the first thing you notice when you check your emotional state, carefully. The way you've learned to do when financial information arrives that might want to become a story about your worth as a person. You don't feel guilty. What you feel is something closer to recognition. The particular feeling of seeing something that was always there, that you were always part of, that you just hadn't looked at directly before. The pattern is not a failure. The pattern is information. And information, unlike a resolution or a plan or a January commitment, doesn't expire. It just sits there, patient and factual, waiting for you to do something with it. You open a new document. Not a budget, not a savings goal, just a blank page where you write, at the top, what do I actually want my money to do? Not what the books say it should do, not what the 20% rule requires, not what the version of yourself who imagines early retirement and reads articles about index funds aspires to. What do you, with your specific life and your specific patterns and your 3 times a week coffee and your 6 dinners a month, actually want from the money that comes in? You stare at the blank page for a while. Then, slowly, you start writing. Not because you have the answer, because you've been asking the wrong question for 12 years and this is, at last, the right one. The 2014 version of you didn't know everything, but he knew what he was doing with his money, even when it wasn't much. He was paying attention in a way that got lost somewhere in the years between then and now, somewhere in the raises and the improved circumstances and the comfortable feeling that there was enough not to worry. There was always enough to worry about. The worry just changed shape. And it turns out the shape it needed to change into was this: a Tuesday afternoon, an email you almost deleted, and 12 years of statements that looked back at you like a mirror you hadn't known was there.